Well, hey everybody, this is Coach Rob, and as promised last week, I was going to be bringing you a webinar, and it's all about what a coach brings to the table, specifically about sports management frameworks, specifically my framework. What I'm going to be sharing with you guys and gals today is a very simple set of slides. You have our introduction slide, and you have two more slides. That's the only things that I'm going to be talking from. So hopefully you won't think of this as death by PowerPoint. I do realize that the previous webinar was very lengthy. This one won't be nearly as long, but very, very helpful when it comes time to choosing a coach, or better yet, choosing me as your coach. In this first slide, what you see here is a self-coach sports framework. Pretty chaotic looking, isn't it? This is not based on any type of scientific data or study. This is purely my own personal experience as once a former self-coached athlete, and also when I have brought in newly self-coached athletes who have finally decided to drop a dime and hire my services. If we take a look to the outside of this Venn diagram, we have a type, training, competition, and motivation. And then on the inner part, we kind of have some of those things that I see very, very often with folks that are self-coached. So let's start at the top with type. Typically what I find are type A personalities, those hard chargers, highly motivated. Quite often they're professionals. Not everyone that I coach is a professional athlete. I have had a few that I've either coached or I've consulted for. Many of them are beginners all the way up to elite in various disciplines. But probably the biggest thing that drives these folks is a will to succeed or a desire to succeed. When it comes to self-coached athletes that are just getting started, training does come up, and immediately they're trying to plan. They don't even know where to start. They're organizing by instinct and maybe something that they've read in their favorite magazine or their favorite blog. They're going to possibly test from time to time to see if the work that they've been doing is helping, but not often. And then the other thing too that is problematic about training at a self-coach level is this concept of groupthink. And what we're talking about there is the fact that when a self-coached athlete doesn't have a whole lot to rely on, they reach out to friends, maybe some teammates, that sort of thing, or people in their club, and start asking questions. And that in itself is not a bad thing. I think we all should be asking lots of questions. The problem is the order the questions are asked in, the information given back may not be that helpful, or could even be worse. It could be damaging. Then if we go over to the right side, we have competition. Type A personalities want what? They want to win, and they don't know how. That's one of the biggest problems with a self-coached athlete, is not knowing how to win. And probably the biggest problem in a self-coached athlete is being results-driven rather than being performance-driven. And then once again, same problem with groupthink. Anytime that you're dealing with a team scenario, a club scenario, you're asking a lot of questions, you're trying to figure out tactics and strategies if you're within a team or within a club that's competing. And I don't care what the sport is. It doesn't really matter when we're talking about a sports framework. This could be applied to almost anything, as you will see. And then finally, at the bottom, you have motivation. What was the motivation in the first place to get involved in some sort of sport? Usually it's going to be because they've watched their favorite pro. Maybe they've been involved in sports before. Maybe when they were younger, they played in team sports. And now that they have some free time on their hands, they want to get more involved, and they enjoy competition. Maybe they have some friends, club mates, teammates that have been trying to egg you on into getting more involved in competition. And then, of course, there's always those folks that gravitate towards, some aspect of risk, speed, and of course, one of the biggest ones is accomplishments. And there's certainly no shortage of accomplishments that can be had when you're a part of sport. Now let's dive into the center here. You'll notice that there's a vertical word here, frustration. And that could probably be replaced with any number of four-letter words. As you progress as a self-coached athlete, you're going to find there in the top, where we kind of go from type to training, is a serious lack of knowledge. And that plagues all of us. I don't care If you've been involved in other sports, you're going to a new sport, there's lots to learn. And when you're doing it on your own, all that you have is your scenario of what ifs. How is this person doing it? What are they, who's doing what, when, how? You might not even be asking those questions. And you're looking in all kinds of places. Maybe you've purchased some books. Maybe you've participated in a webinar. Maybe you've done all these things. And you still find that your information is disorganized and your efforts aren't helping you. Back to the point where I made the comment of being results driven. When you look between type and competition, results driven in itself doesn't sound like a bad idea. The problem is, as a beginner, really you've got to quit worrying about when you're going to win and start learning about what it takes to win. What are the performance requirements? What are the fitness requirements? What are the knowledge and experience requirements to get you from where you are to where you want to be? So instead of being so results driven, must win, have to hit the podium, must be in the top 5, top 10, top 20, top 30, top 100, you've got to quit thinking that way and start learning and being more concerned with how to improve your performance and get there. And if you don't know what is required to get there, you've got a long road ahead of you to learn what that means. And that kind of goes down to this bottom part. If you're not spending the necessary and accurate amount of time learning how to go and graduate from being results driven to performance driven, you're going to be discouraged and very depressed when it comes time to compete. You're talking 1, 2, 3 years into this and you're not seeing results, you're starting to get very, very, very frustrated. Then the one thing that I hope never happens to any of you is that area between training and motivation where we start dealing with frequent injuries and illness. Injuries in themselves may not be catastrophic, or they could be very simple. They could be overuse injuries because of, maybe a bad shoe choice, maybe a bad bike fit, maybe some bad form in the gym. And then, of course, illness kind of goes hand in hand even with those of us that are doing this on a regular basis. That's part of being an endurance athlete, unfortunately. We are prone to upper respiratory infections, and other illnesses that may get us from time to time are the things that plague everybody, because depending on when the flu season starts and where your race season is, or your training sessions or your training season begins, you could put yourself in a more prone position to catch whatever bug is flying around because you're immunocompromised. So this self-coach sports framework is a mess. There's a lot of chaos there. And when I was coaching myself, that's what I felt. When it was just me, myself, and I doing everything alone. I had no input from anybody else. The occasional cycling buddy or running buddy or duathlon person or overhearing someone in a group ride, group run, or a competition. And I would start to go, I wonder if I should go down that road. I wonder if I should investigate into that interval or that type of training organization. Started investigating what was available for just recreational cyclists. And to be quite blunt, there wasn't anything specific. So instead, what I decided to do was take a look at what was out there for competitive athletes. And as I started to read all of the various popular books at the time, I started to notice a trend that all the information that was being provided in those books could be applied to a recreational athlete, and I started to do that. Unfortunately, I was not getting the results that I wanted, and it wasn't until a year or two afterwards when I started to compete and I hired a coach that I started to figure out the things that were missing, from this way I was managing my work. So let's go ahead and talk about how I manage the work, because your self-coach framework, like I said, is a bit disorganized, very chaotic. And if we take a look at the sports management framework that I work from, first and foremost, what I want to say is that this was adapted by some excellent work that was done by Mark Liversedge. And if you're not familiar with Mark is one of the, I would say, for lack of better terms, chief developer of Golden Cheetah. And I'm not 100% sure why Mark started to kind of dive into sports management framework, I have some suspicions that it has something to do with future development in Golden Cheetah, but I really liked where it was coming from. However, what he's done, I'm pretty sure has been adapted yet from other frameworks that were aimed, not at individual coaching or what I would refer to as private coaching, but it had a lot more to do with that aspect as well as teams and squads, specialist roles, things like that. But when you take a look at the sports management framework, you'll notice on the left that there's two roles, the coach's role and the athlete's role. And then on the far right, the coach's role could be broken into three areas. The scope of what a coach does or the context, motivation development, and assessments and interventions. Then under the athlete's role, we look at talent development and the execution of their training and finally the well-being of the athlete. And I love this, that we're asking some questions. Who, what, when, where, how, and why. This is not organized exactly the same way that Mark's original framework was, and I've taken some liberties with this because this is about me and how I work with athletes, not how someone else does. So let's start with my role, the coach's role, and let's talk about the scope and context of what I'm doing. From a who perspective, I'm looking for athletes. I'm going to be identifying talent. I'm going to be recruiting athletes to the coaching practice. And what am I trying to accomplish? What is the scope of a coach? I'm looking to help with outcomes, performance improvements, and the development of capabilities. When does this occur? Events, clinics, camps, many, many places. Sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's in person. Where does this occur? Remote, local, races, events, camps, clinics. Again, there are all kinds of places where a coach is going to interact with an athlete, whether you're recruiting or you're actually working one-on-one or even with a team. How does this occur? Well, in my practice, it's all about evidence-based performance development, my own personal continuing education, and the experience that I've developed as an athlete and as a coach working with, by now, almost 200 athletes. Why? Why does a coach coach? We're talking about the long-term planning and development of athletes and a coaching practice. I think that's the best way I can put this, in terms of this framework. But I think that there are a lot of reasons why people turn to coaching. I've got the bug because I loved helping other people, especially those that wanted to be helped. When we start talking about motivation development of athletes, it's not just motivation, it's also physical development as well. And we're back to the whole who. Well, once again, it's about selecting athletes, possibly for a team or even trying to find a team for a given athlete. I've done that many times. And then what is it that we're doing? Well, capability development. We as coaches aren't just developing your physical strength. We're there to also help to develop your mental strength. We're there to help shore up other weaknesses that you might have. Maybe there's a nutrition challenge. Maybe you're really fighting with the best ways to recover from all this work and racing. When do we do this? Well, really, meetings, events, races, ad hoc. And what does all that mean? So in meetings, depending on the service level someone signs up with me, I might be talking to someone practically daily, maybe weekly, maybe every other week, maybe once a month. And then I'm certainly going to be talking to my athletes at events and races if I'm there in person or I've been hired to be in person. And then, of course, ad hoc is whenever it happens, depending on once again, the service level I'm hired at, I'm kind of on call in a lot of cases. Where? So once again, remote, local, races, events, camps, clinics, gyms, my home, your home. I've been in many, many places where I'm expected to be a coach and assist with the development of an athlete. How do we do this? Well, through collaboration, communication, mentoring. The collaboration piece, I've always said this. If you've listened to my introduction, and maybe it's because you've listened to the introduction on YouTube or you've been part of one of my introductions to teams. If you've got a team that wants to be coached, that's a private thing that I do with various teams. And in those cases, one of the first things I'll say is that this is a partnership, not a dictatorship. I have a vested interest in you doing well, but I'm not going to sit here and say, thou shalt do X, Y, and Z. You must run this trail. You must bomb down this mountain on your mountain bike. No, you're not going to hear me say that. Primarily because, one, it's a liability on my behalf. If I've never been there and I don't know exactly how to tell you to get through that scenario safely, that puts me at risk. It puts you at risk. So instead, we're talking about a collaboration. You come to me and say, Rob, what do you think about me racing an XYZ race? And I'll be very honest with you. Maybe I've never done that race. Probably not. And then I can look at that and say, based on the energy requirements for that type of race, you're in pretty good shape to do this. That happens more often than you think. Communication, it's two-way. I've had athletes that really hold back a lot. It's really hard to pull things from them. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to develop that rapport between me and the athlete. It's a bit of a faith-based thing. Coach says do this. Well, guess what? I did it and I wasn't happy with the results. Okay, well, now we need to go back and figure out why you weren't happy with those results. Maybe you need a little more time. Maybe it wasn't the right workout for you. We've got to figure that out. Mentoring. This is the part that I think a lot of people, even those that I coach, sometimes really don't think about, because some of this, I've been there and done that, whether it's from a race perspective, a training perspective, signing up with a team, upgrading category, going from just a local race to a regional race to a national level race, trying to prepare for a world level race. That requires some mentoring to get somebody to that point to, one, feel like they're worthy enough to do it, and in some cases, be brave enough to do it. And why? Why the whole focus on motivation and the development in an athlete from a coach's perspective? Well, some of it's just tactics and strategy. And some of it is internal to me, the coach, and some of it I share directly with the athlete. I'm using my own tactics to motivate people. I don't always come out and say exactly what those things are. And the same thing goes with the strategy. Sometimes I will lay something out to an athlete, especially one that's been around the block for a while. Maybe they have been a lifelong athlete. Maybe they've had a coach and they've been either disappointed with the results, or maybe they're moving from one discipline to another that their coach doesn't support, and I do. And there's all kinds of reasons, but more often than not, my tactics are my own. But when it comes to strategies, quite often I will lay that out. It's like, here's where you want to be. Here's where you are. Here's the roadmap to get there. Let's start working that out as a plan. The last layer here in a coach's role under assessment and intervention is another one that I don't think gets enough credit when it comes to the athlete-coach relationship. So back to the who. We're talking about athletic performance, rank, and rating. So we're looking at the athlete. We want to know what his or her performance is, and we want to understand how they rank and how they rate. Now, that ranking could be as simple as an age group ranking, and we could be taking a look at, let's say, for instance, running power, cycling power, and we can profile you against your peers. We can do that by discipline, we can do it by category, we can do it by age group, we can do it by a number of factors, even weight. In some cases, we might be able to do some other things there. We could even take a look at national standings by category, or by number of races competed in. There's all numbers of ways for me to take a look at a rank and a rating your performance as an athlete. And once again, under assessment and interventions, what is it that a coach will do? Oh man, we talk about performance, skill development, nutrition, strength and conditioning, psychology, equipment, fit, biomechanics. It goes on and on and on and on. In some cases, if you're a part of a very large organization, meaning that you're part of a very large team, you may find that not only do you have a coach, you have a team director, you may have some other specialists inside your group. You might have someone that does nothing but aerodynamic bike fitting, and you might have someone else who does standard bike fitting. I mean, it's really amazing how big some of these organizations are and what they can bring to the table. In my role as a private coach, I have experience in a lot of different areas. Some are certified. Some have licenses associated with them, and some do not. When do we do these? Well, assessments are going to occur in this practice, my practice, in cases depending on, once again, service levels, daily, weekly, monthly. Sometimes we're going to be doing some things pre and post event races. And then, of course, one of my favorite things to do is a seasonal summary. some coaches' seasonal summaries are just that. They're once a year. Quite often in my practice, a seasonal summary may happen 2, 3 times a year, especially when I start looking at preseason, on season, off season. We're going to talk about how you're stacking up year over year. If you've been with me for a while, I love showing where people have grown from April of this year compared to April of last year or April 3 years ago. Where are we going to do this? Well, I'm going to start to sound like a parrot here. Once again, remote, local races, events, camps, and clinics. I will say this, that it's very rare for me to be at a race or event and really do a deep dive on an assessment. Simply because, tactically speaking, psychologically speaking, it's a bad idea to provide any kind of information to an athlete prior to a race that might be misconstrued as being negative information, or that they just don't have the necessary fitness to do well that day. I've got to tell you, I have won races and been upset because I didn't meet performance numbers. So I don't want to do that to an athlete. I want them to walk away from a race or a competition of any kind, understanding that they gave it their all. So instead, when I'm there, it's not about assessments as much more as it's about intervention. Let's go down the basics. Let's make sure that you're doing all the necessarily foundational things to be successful today. How? Planning, training delivery, and once again, assessments. Planning can take on any number of things. We're talking about annual planning. We're talking about your monthly or your quarterly planning, your block-based planning, whether it's periodized or polarized, and how is that training going to be delivered to you? In this practice, all of the training is delivered to you via Training Peaks. Some of those workouts may also be automatically synced to your favorite bike computer, running GPS, that sort of thing. And then why? What's the total focus in a coach's role in that kind of question? The best I could come up with, because this was not making much sense to me in this framework, is specificity. That's a big challenge for self-coached athletes, is understanding how to train for a specific discipline, and especially for a roadie. Okay, one of the big problems with road cyclists is that inside of road cycling, technically there are 3, maybe actually 4 disciplines that you're training for, depending on the type of road cyclist you are. If you're a GC rider, you're going to have to understand how to train and race for road, time trial, criteriums, circuit racing, as well as hills. How do you climb effectively? So there's a lot going on there. And a coach can help you narrow some of that down. You start talking about multi-sport athletes, triathletes, duathletes, aquabike, aquathon. You've got 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 sports that you're actually trying to develop for. And then specificity could even come down to a specialization. You have totally focused on one thing and one thing alone. I am a gravel racer and nothing more. Well, the good thing is about programs around gravel racing, or very long, cross-country mountain bike racing, is they share a lot of common things. But where is it that you are falling flat? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? I had a coach that I worked with once that looked me square in the eye, and I had just assumed that I was the world's worst climber. And the answer to that was absolutely not. You've got the power, you've got the form, you've got the speed. What you're lacking in is confidence. So it ended up being more of a mental issue. And then after that, my climbing took off. And I love to climb. I'll still tell you I'm not the fastest climber in the world on a bike, but I enjoy it. Funny thing is that as a runner, I'm actually a very fast runner uphill in my age group, at the very least, and I take great joy in passing people on hills when I'm running. All right, so now that we've gone through the who, what, when, where, how, and why on the sports management framework for a coach's role, let's dive into the athlete's role. So in the athlete, we've got, once again, talent development and your execution of your training and into competition, and of course your well-being. So if we look at the who, we're going to talk about the athlete's strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to talent development. And I've already kind of referred to that under specificity. And once again, you may think that you have a strength or a weakness, and they could be The inverse of one another. You may be a stronger climber than you think, and you may be a weaker sprinter than you think. A coach is going to be able to help you understand through their own examples or knowledge behind things like athletic performance rank and rating will go a long way to taking a look at you and saying, according to power profile data, other race data, my own personal anecdotal experience working with other athletes, being around teammates that had these types of specializations and specific needs, you are either strong or you are weak. And this is how we're going to take care of that. The other thing, too, that an athlete is often surprised by is they're kind of responsible for their own training schedule and event selection. They're often surprised to hear that they have a big part in setting up their own training schedule. I ask a number of very simple questions. Which days are untouchable? Are there days that you just simply cannot train? I will block that off. When do you have business trips or trips for school or other times that are just completely locked down? And they give me that information. And then I'll ask for what holidays are off limits. Which days do you not want to train? Then based on age and maybe their level of relationship. If this is a younger athlete, if I'm working with a junior, a lot of this information is going to come from a parent. And if I'm working with someone who's college age or just out of college, maybe not married yet, maybe not in a serious committed relationship yet, then they have a lot more flexibility. But when someone comes to me and they've been around the block for a while, they're married or in a long-term committed relationship, I might look at this and say, okay, I know that you think you can train through Christmas. It's probably not a great idea. You might want to take that day off, trust me. Then when we start talking about event selection, remember what I said, it really is a bit of a liability concern for a coach to tell you what races you should be doing, specifically saying, oh, I know that route like the back of my hand, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. But what I like to do in those situations is, once again, it's collaborative. It's a partnership. If you come to me and you give me a calendar with 55 races in it, and I know for a fact that, one, you've never raced before, or the most you've ever done was 10 or 15 races in a year, I'm going to have to say, that's too much. We really need to pare this back. Why are you wanting to do this? I know why you're wanting to do it. You're excited. You've got a coach in your corner, and you really want to put all this hard-earned work out there in the field to find out what you're really capable of doing. Man, I appreciate that. I really do. But going to that level, to that extreme, is a bit much. I would probably, under advisement to any self-coached athlete, try not to do more than 20% more work year over year. And that includes the number of races or events that you select. When do you do this? Preseason, on-season, off-season. This is what you need to be thinking about with your talent and any athletic performance development, is that there's a preseason, an in or on season, and an off season. I don't care where you live in the world. I don't care if you get to ride or run or be outside year round because you've got perfect weather. There still is a pre, an on, and an off season to be considered. Where does all this happen? Well, it's going to happen in the gym, it's going to happen at home, and it's going to happen in the field. So gym meaning strength and conditioning, auxiliary styles of training. My athletes work primarily with weights for resistance-based training. We've done other programs. I have some athletes that are really big fans of TRX, others that are huge fans of yoga, and then, of course, core and other flexibility recommendations. In my primary practice, I am a big believer in functional strength development for endurance athletes. I have programs that are specific to cyclists, runners, and multi-sport athletes. I also provide and prescribe a core and flexibility conditioning program for everyone that I work with. Not everybody uses it. I find it interesting that some have used others, the book base that you can purchase, and then when they come back and they say, you know what, it's not working like I hope, what do you have? And then I give them my plan, which is usually significantly more simple and less time consuming, and quite often I hear very, very good remarks about those programs. The other thing, too, that I would say that goes on is some of this may be virtual. That's one place where I would say that it's missing. So in the field could cover some of that would occur both online, where you're doing your training indoors on a smart trainer or a treadmill or a rower or maybe a endless pool if you have one, or you could be outdoors. How does this happen? Well, you're going to be doing a lot of your training both solo and in group training and in simulations. That's where the virtual side of the world comes from. And some people don't do well with solo training. So sometimes I have to really, really help someone figure out how you're going to get this workout, this interval program in while being in the middle of a group event or club event, that kind of thing. That's difficult. That's really tricky. Sometimes I just have to have a conversation with an athlete and say, you can't have it all. Do you want to be stronger, faster, and fitter? You're going to have to do some intervals and you're going to have to do them solo. And then why? Well, you're trying to develop your performance and your racecraft. So performance development and racecraft are the two things that you really got to be thinking about as a competitive athlete. And when I'm talking about racecraft, you could apply that to any sport and just take the word race out of it and just athletic craft in general. Anytime that you're in training, you need to be thinking about it a little bit differently. Why am I doing this interval? How does it apply to what I'm trying to accomplish in the field, on the bike, on the run, in the pool, in the ocean, in the lake, wherever your sport takes you? You've got to be taking that into account. Your training is nothing more than practice for the real thing. Now let's get down to the last row in the athlete's role, and we're talking about the execution and your well-being. One of the things that was a little surprising to me was this concept of phenotyping. So that is just, it's a fancy word for understanding and learning your strengths and weaknesses as an athlete. The phenotype could be anything in running from a sprinter to a stayer to a chaser. In cycling, it could be things like, once again, a sprinter, maybe a time trialer, a climber, a GCer, a puncher, a ruler. There's all kinds of different phenotypes. And most of them, when we're looking at a power curve, has to do with the amount of power you can hold for a given duration. Sprinters need to be able to hold a significant amount of power over 30 seconds, but the most explosive amount of power happens in the first 1 to 5 seconds. And we start talking about specialization and discipline. It becomes your role as an athlete to start to develop your own set of skills and specializations. So for instance, with myself, I really, really enjoy time trialing. It has become a specialization. And then discipline, that is the discipline. I am primarily a road cyclist. I have also been a very successful multi-sport athlete as a duathlete and as a runner. So when we start talking about what, with regards to your execution of your training, it's simple. It's compete, recover, compete, recover. When we get this far into the performance framework, we're not talking about training as much as your event development. You're going to compete and then you're going to recover from that competition or your event. And then win. It's just like before. We're going to be looking at your execution both in pre, on, and off season. Once again, I don't care what time of the year it is for you. I don't care what the temperatures are. There will always be a pre-season, an on-season, and an off-season. There are some of the guys and gals that I coach that I think they feel like their year is endless because they actually may compete in multiple disciplines. I have road cyclists that will race track, and when they race track, it goes well into the fall. I have lots of road cyclists that will move out of road cycling into cyclocross in the fall and go almost all the way through the winter. We're talking about folks that practically are competing year-round at that point. Where does this occur? Events and competitions. Events could be almost anything. That could be a team camp. It could be a club event. It could be a recon mission on an existing course. And competition is just what it is. It's where you put your money down, you pinned on a number, and you took off. And how does all this work occur? Well, it still occurs in competition, especially when we look at competition in this practice, we prioritize our competition, A, B, or C. C's are the lower level priorities for our events or our competitions. They may be an event or a discipline that we've never participated in before. So we're testing the waters, we're putting a toe in. So we're there to learn. Or maybe it's an event you've done many times, you're not so concerned about it. It's more about training. It's more about understanding what your competition is doing. We're getting a good read on everyone that you're participating against on an upcoming race. Where's the chink in the armor? That kind of thing. And then, of course, we have other things like the B category or the B priority and the A priority. A priority doesn't have to be a national championship. It could be a club ride, as far as I'm concerned, or it could be the local 5K for the turkey trot. If it's the one that you want to put the most energy and focus into, I'm going to help you do that. Now, testing is something that very, very, very few athletes enjoy doing, but it's a necessary part of the platform that is sports management. We have got to figure out where you are. So you cannot improve what you don't measure. I know it's an old cliche, and some of you just heard that, probably just groaned because you've already heard it before. Whether it's business or it's sports, you're going to have to take measure. And if you don't do that, then you're just flailing, you're guessing, and nobody is going to be very successful with a bunch of swags, wild ass guesses. Why do we do this? Once again, it's collaboration and a feedback loop. So remember, I said there's collaboration between the athlete and the coach. There's also a feedback loop. I learn more when the athlete shares more. This hurt, or this feels a little achy. Wow, I needed to know that ASAP, and I need to make a change very, very quickly. That kind of feedback loop goes on and helps quite a bit. I get all kinds of conversations in this feedback loop that goes on between me and an athlete. There's no shortage of challenges that I'm faced with in trying to help an athlete organized, stay motivated, and frustration free. So let's go back to our previous chart really quickly. Do you want to be a self-coached athlete and have to fight the good fight all by your lonesome? If you want that, you're going to have to be incredibly well organized. You're going to have to answer yourself and a lot of questions that you have, and you're going to have to be very quick about it and not second guess yourself. That might be the hardest aspect of being a self-coached athlete that there ever was, is not second guessing yourself. Did I just eat the right thing before racing? Am I eating the right thing after racing? Am I doing the right workouts? Am I improving? Am I going backwards? How do I know this? It's a tough haul. So once again, this is Coach Rob. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm the owner of Pause Performance Coaching, and you're more than welcome to leave a comment here, or you can visit us at PPC and leave a comment there. I'll make sure to leave links at the bottom of this. And I really do want to hear back from you guys and gals. If you've got a friend of a friend that wants to be coached and doesn't understand how to get started, it's very easy. 30, 45-minute phone call is all that we need to get started, and I can help you get to where you want to be. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your training week, and I hope you found this helpful.